Uneasy is the head that wears the crown, as William Shakespeare once wrote in Henry IV, Part 2, though it's often misquoted as heavy is the head by people who don't watch enough masterpiece theater. The pithy quote refers to the burden of being in charge of an entire nation and its people. But not all members of the royal families have necessarily been so civic-minded. In fact, to paraphrase another esteemed work of literature, some royals are just like us. So, today we're giving the side eye to some historic acts of royal pettiness. But before we get to all the squabbling earls, why not subscribe to the Weird History channel? After that, jump down into the comments and let us know what other important people you want to hear about. All right, subjects, nobody tell the Emperor he is not wearing any clothes. Most of us have people in our lives we'd prefer not to interact with, but that's just part of life. You have to do your best to get along with everyone if you can, unless you're an actual king. Then the rules don't apply. Take the case of England's King George IV. In 1794, he became engaged to Caroline of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel, the daughter of the Duke of Brunswick and Princess Augusta of Great Britain. Not only had George never even met Caroline, but he agreed to the union for purely financial reasons. George was deeply in debt, and Parliament agreed to increase his allowance only if he married a princess. The nation of Brunswick, though small, was also geographically significant, giving Britain an important ally on the European mainland as it pursued an ongoing war with France. What a meet-cute. Though the marriage with Caroline looked good on paper, George did not particularly enjoy his new fiancée's company. Following their first meeting in early 1795, George reportedly got hammered after finding Caroline's appearance disappointing, her personal hygiene unsatisfactory, and her table manners at dinner appalling. He was reportedly drunk during the actual wedding ceremony, and apparently told a friend after the blessed event that he suspected she was not technically a virgin. At least they didn't play Uptown Funk on the dance floor. In a letter to a friend, George claimed that he managed to consummate his marriage with Caroline, but just barely, and despite a good deal of disgust. The couple spent only 2 nights together post-wedding before separating on a nearly permanent basis. In 1821, when George was finally crowned king, he famously turned Caroline away from his coronation at Westminster Abbey. She passed away just 3 weeks later at the age of 53 from what historians now think may have been an intestinal obstruction or potentially cancer. It's entirely possible that George's displeasure with Caroline had nothing to do with her flaws as a person. He was already married to a woman named Maria Fitzherbert, but because she was a Catholic, the union violated the Royal Marriages Act of 1772 and was rendered invalid. Perhaps he just held this against his new bride for the rest of her life. Another memorably unhappy groom was England's King Edward II. Edward's father was Edward I, aka Edward Longshanks, the evil king from Mel Gibson's Braveheart. When Dad died in 1307, Edward II succeeded the throne, and the following year he agreed to marry Isabella, the daughter of King Philippe IV of France. This was an important political alliance, which would hopefully end years of tension and conflict between England and France. But there was a hiccup. Edward II had a very close personal relationship with a man named Piers Gaveston, who may have been his lover, though this has never been confirmed. It's possible that the two men had entered into an agreement known as adoptive brotherhood, which was fairly common in the Middle Ages, or that they were just good buddies who also worked together. You know, good buddies, real good buddies. Historians disagree, not just about the intensity of Edward's relationship with Gaveston, but also the aggressiveness of Edward's rejection of Isabella. One popular, though likely apocryphal story suggests that, upon first meeting his bride on the shores of Dover in 1308, Edward made a big show of kissing Piers Gaveston instead of her. Other reports suggest Edward enjoyed lavishing his male lover with jewels and finery that would otherwise have gone to his queen. She got the cheap stuff, if anything at all. Then, of course, there's Edward's depiction in the movie Braveheart, which shows his father angrily throwing his male lover out of a window. None of that is based on the historical record, but it is clear that Edward and Isabella were not particularly close or affectionate. Kings and queens are very frequently parents, but being a great leader and being a great mom can be entirely different skill sets. Take Queen Victoria, one of England's most iconic monarchs. She had 9 kids, but formed a particularly close relationship with her daughter Beatrice, who remained a constant companion even after her many other children got married and paired off. When Beatrice got an offer of marriage from Prince Henry of Battenberg, Victoria was defiantly opposed to the union, fearing that she was about to lose a vital connection. After Beatrice laid down the law and informed her mother that she was getting married to the prince, Victoria gave her daughter the silent treatment for several months, communicating only via written notes. Isn't that just normal communication, but a little more inconvenient? Punishments are weird. Finally, after a year of debate, the Queen consented to the marriage, but only on the condition that Beatrice remained on staff as her unofficial secretary. It was the ultimate mother-in-law suite. In 1620, Maria Eleonora, a noblewoman who had been born in Prussia, married Gustavus Adolphus, the King of Sweden. The union itself was controversial. Maria Eleonora's mother, Duchess Anna of Prussia, had consented to the marriage, but her brother George William, who had recently succeeded their father as Elector of Brandenburg, was opposed and became quite angry when he learned that his mom and sibling had gone ahead with their plans without consulting him. The couple struggled for years to have children. Maria Eleonora suffered multiple miscarriages, which triggered a lifelong battle with depression. In 1623, she had a daughter named Christina in honor of the king's mother, but sadly the baby died within a year. Another daughter, also named Christina, arrived in 1627. She was born covered in soft hair, known as lanugo, which caused everyone present to initially and delightedly assume she was a boy. Maria Eleonora's mental state by this point was so fragile that the king and her court waited several days to break the news to her about the baby's actual biological sex. When she finally heard the news, she said to have exclaimed, "Instead of a son, I am given a daughter, dark and ugly, with a great nose and black eyes. Take her from me. I will not have such a monster." Love you too, Mom. Her resentment of the child didn't end there. It's also been suggested that the Queen tried to injure her child, possibly in the throes of postnatal depression, or the young Christina was particularly accident-prone, falling mysteriously from her cradle and even tumbling down a flight of stairs. During the year after her birth, the Queen was said to have frequent bouts of hysteria, and Gustavus Adolphus described her as being a very sick woman, though he was frequently absent pursuing military campaigns and didn't have a lot of first-hand experience at home. Over time, the king formed a close relationship with Christina, who would ultimately succeed him on Sweden's throne. But Maria Eleonora took little part in her daughter's life or upbringing. Clovis was the first monarch to unite all the Franks under one banner, essentially making him the first king of what would become France around the year 509 CE. He was born a pagan, and during the early years of his reign, as he pursued military campaigns around Gaul, he pillaged many churches because they were just regular buildings to him. Ultimately, for political reasons, it made sense to roughly align with the Gallo-Roman clergy, leading him to take a Christian wife and eventually convert himself. This event gave rise to one of the most infamous stories from medieval French history, which may or may not be entirely historically accurate. As the anecdote goes, in 486, prior to his conversion, Clovis led his Frankish army into battle against Roman forces in the town of Soissons and pillaged the local church as part of the campaign. This included the theft of a vase, known as the Vase of Soissons, of legendary beauty and size. After the fighting was done, the Bishop of Reims, later named Saint Remigius, sent a messenger to Clovis asking him to keep all of his earnings if he must, but please return the Vase of Soissons due to its particular holy significance. The king agreed, but one of Clovis's soldiers apparently disagreed with the decision and smashed the vase to pieces with his battle axe. Thing was, Clovis really liked that vase. Though Clovis reportedly didn't react strongly at the time and simply ordered the smashed pieces of vase be returned to the church, he hadn't emotionally recovered from the incident a full year later. Upon seeing the soldier again, he threw the man's axe to the ground, and when he stooped down to pick it up, Clovis reportedly smashed the man's skull with his own axe, exclaiming, "Just as you did to the Vase of Soissons." But did he pronounce it vase or vase? We'll never know. One of French King Louis Philippe's greatest rivalries was exceptionally mundane: cake taxes. In 1832, a French pastry chef identified only as Monsieur Remontel wrote to the king complaining that Mexican officials looted his shop on the outskirts of Mexico City. Mexican officials claimed they were seeking funds Remontel legitimately owed to the government. Nonetheless, concerned about this situation and other complaints by French nationals living in Mexico, the king took action in 1838. Initially, he ordered the Mexican government to pay around 600,000 pesos in damage to French citizens, a massive sum considering the initial scale of the complaints. When President Anastasio Bustamante refused, the French initiated a blockade of all Mexican ports between the Yucatan and the Rio Grande, along with military seizure of the important port city of Veracruz. This action sparked a conflict between Mexico and France that came to be known as the Pastry War, which is probably the most delicious name for any war. The incident lasted around 3 months and ended with Mexico finally agreeing to pay France the 600,000 pesos. The sum was never actually delivered though, and France and Mexico were once again at war by 1861. Maybe they needed to split a piece of cake. It's hard to be mad when you're eating cake. Peter III of Russia was ultimately overthrown by his own wife, Catherine II, better known to history as Catherine the Great. But he's also notable for organizing a trial perhaps even more petty than Louis Philippe's dessert blockade. It turns out the real-life ruler wasn't much different from his portrayal on The Great. Well into his adult life, Peter remained a big fan of playing with toys, particularly toy soldiers. It was perhaps his favorite activity and a nighttime pre-bed ritual for the Tsar. One night, Peter discovered that a mouse had chewed on and damaged one of his prized toys. Infuriated, he formally accused the rodent of treason, even going so far as to construct a miniature gallows so the offender could be properly executed. Catherine taking over was probably best for everyone. So, what do you think? Which royal was the most petty? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.